It started with the smell, not loud, not immediate, but a creeping rot that clung to the walls of a storage unit on the outskirts of Athens, Georgia. Officers called to investigate a tip didn't expect to find bodies, but they did, 2 of them, hidden beneath tarps, plastic, and the careless weight of a silence that had lasted too long. The discovery would expose the work of a man who operated with quiet control and deadly precision. His name was Philmon Deshawn Chambers, but on the streets, they called him Dollar Phil. Chambers wasn't just a member of the Gangster Disciples. He was a leader, an enforcer, and according to prosecutors, the mastermind behind a chilling conspiracy that led to multiple deaths. On the surface, he blended in. No flashy behavior, no obvious signs of violence. But behind that calm exterior was a man whose loyalty to his gang eclipsed any concern for human life. The year was 2019, and Derek Ruff and Joshua Jackson had gone missing. Both were young, both known in their communities, and both allegedly involved in gang activity. What set them apart, according to rumors, was a suspicion that they were cooperating with law enforcement. In the world Chambers operated in, that wasn't just risky, it was unforgivable. Using encrypted messages, burner phones, and coded conversations, Chambers orchestrated what authorities would later call a murderous conspiracy. Ruff and Jackson were lured, killed, and dumped in a storage unit. The message was clear: betrayal would be buried, literally. For months, their families searched, prayed, waited, until the smell led someone to call police. The bodies were found, and the investigation began. Local and federal agencies combined forces. The FBI, ATF, and Athens Clark County Police launched a deep probe into the Gangster Disciples local chapter. What they uncovered was a chilling map of violence, loyalty, and coded discipline. In 2024, he was arrested and charged with RICO conspiracy, murder in aid of racketeering, and firearm use causing death. During the trial, prosecutors painted Chambers as a man who viewed human lives as currency, expendable in the service of control. Audio recordings, text messages, and testimony from former associates filled the courtroom. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Chambers was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 10 years, with 5 years supervised release. What began with a smell ended with a man locked away forever, and a reminder that silence doesn't always mean peace. Number 2. Brandon L. Winnegan. She wanted out. That's what witnesses said about Brianna Arrington in early 2020. She was done with the gang life, tired of the violence, tired of living in fear. But wanting out of the Rollin' 20s outlaw bloods wasn't like quitting a job. In their world, leaving came with consequences. And according to prosecutors, Brandon L. Winnegan, known as Say So, was the man who made sure of it. Winnegan wasn't just another gang member. He held weight. He gave orders. Described by law enforcement as a violent leader, he ran operations across Hampton Roads, Virginia, with intimidation and fear. To his followers, he was respected. To his enemies, he was feared. And to those who wanted to walk away, he was unforgiving. Arrington's attempt to leave the gang was met with suspicion and anger. Court documents revealed that rumors began circulating that she was talking to law enforcement. Whether those rumors were true didn't matter. The gang believed it. That was enough. On a chilling night in 2020, Arrington was abducted by multiple gang members. What followed was a brutal assault. She was beaten, shot, and left for dead. But she survived. Bruised, bleeding, and terrified, she told investigators everything. Her testimony sparked a massive investigation into the Rollin' 20s Outlaw Bloods local chapter. Wiretaps were installed. Surveillance teams followed known associates. Dozens of hours of phone calls were recorded. And in the center of it all was Say So. Prosecutors built a case that portrayed Winnegan as the orchestrator of the attack. He didn't need to pull the trigger. His words were enough. Witnesses testified that he ordered Arrington's punishment personally. The assault wasn't just retribution, it was a message. In 2023, Winnegan was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit malicious wounding, firearm use, abduction, aggravated malicious wounding, child neglect, gang activity, and firearm possession by a felon. The courtroom saw tearful testimony from Arrington, along with intercepted phone calls where Winnegan discussed dealing with loose ends. The defense argued that their client had no direct involvement, but the weight of evidence proved too much. After a lengthy trial, Winnegan was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison plus 38 years. For many in Hampton Roads, the case exposed just how dangerous gang loyalty can be and how easily suspicion can turn into a death sentence. Arrington lived to tell her story. Others weren't as lucky. Number 3. Fredy Ivan Jandres-Parada. It started with a convoy at dawn. Unmarked trucks rolling through the streets of San Salvador, headlights cutting through the morning haze. Inside, one of them sat a man who'd spent years moving in the shadows, directing violence without ever pulling the trigger. To most, his name meant nothing, but to El Salvador's anti-gang task forces, Fredy Ivan Jandres-Parada was one of the most dangerous men in the country. Fredy grew up in a time when MS-13 wasn't just a gang, it was an entire ecosystem. Neighborhoods operated under their rules. Friendships, safety, even daily routines were decided by whoever held the most influence. By his late 20s, Fredy wasn't just a foot soldier. Intelligence reports labeled him a program leader, someone who coordinated both local cliques and international drug routes. His reputation rested on strategy rather than showmanship, making him harder to track and harder to catch. According to prosecutors, Fredy had been orchestrating a campaign of violence that crossed borders. Extortion rackets, trafficking operations, and targeted attacks on rivals and police all ran through networks he controlled. In early 2021, investigators say they intercepted encrypted messages detailing orders for coordinated strikes meant to keep certain territories under MS-13 control. These weren't impulsive street-level crimes. They were structured, planned, and politically calculated. The breakthrough came when law enforcement pieced together communications between El Salvador, Guatemala, and even the United States. Informants confirmed that Fredy was acting as a central figure in maintaining transnational alliances. The U.S. Treasury had already blacklisted him, citing his role in organized crime. Then came the charge that escalated everything: terrorism. Under El Salvador's laws, directing gang activity that destabilizes the state can be prosecuted as an act of terrorism, and authorities believed Fredy's operations fit that definition exactly. By March 2021, a joint task force moved in. Fredy was taken into custody during a coordinated sweep targeting high-ranking MS-13 members. In court, prosecutors laid out a case built on digital evidence, witness testimony, and years of intelligence files. The defense argued the charges were politically motivated, but the scope of the evidence and the international pressure left little room for doubt. Fredy was convicted on terrorism charges and handed a lengthy prison sentence in a maximum security facility designed to isolate gang leadership from their networks. Reports say he remains in custody under strict surveillance, his communications monitored and movements limited to a few minutes a day. Fredy now spends his days far from the streets where his decisions once dictated life and death. And yet, for those who knew his reach, the question lingers: how much of his influence can really be locked away? Number 4. Silvia Lorena Bonilla-De Jandres. On the morning of February 25, 2025, federal agents moved in on a residential area of Alexandria, Virginia. Their target was a woman who had been on international wanted lists for years: 40-year-old Silvia Lorena Bonilla-De Jandres. According to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, she was a documented member of MS-13. Her capture that day was the result of a coordinated operation led by ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations Washington, D.C., in partnership with the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Virginia State Police. These agencies had been tracking her movements as part of a broader crackdown on high-ranking or influential gang members living in the U.S. who were wanted for serious crimes abroad. The case against Bonilla-De Jandres began years earlier. Records show that she unlawfully entered the United States near the Rio Grande Valley, Texas, on February 21, 2016. She was placed into removal proceedings at that time, but was released from custody while her immigration case moved forward. Just over a year later, on August 28, 2017, authorities in El Salvador issued a warrant for her arrest, charging her with aggravated extortion blackmail and terrorist affiliation. The charges were tied directly to her alleged role and membership within MS-13. These accusations prompted Interpol to issue a red notice on November 24, 2017, alerting law enforcement agencies worldwide that she was wanted for prosecution in her home country. Despite the international alert, Bonilla-De Jandres remained inside the United States for years while her immigration case progressed. On July 11, 2024, a U.S. Department of Justice immigration judge ordered her removed from the country. By then, she was considered both a fugitive from justice in El Salvador and a person with a final order of removal in the United States. According to ICE, she still remained at large until that February morning in 2025, when agents found her in Alexandria and took her into custody without incident. Following the arrest, ICE confirmed she would remain in U.S. custody pending her removal to El Salvador, where she faces prosecution on the outstanding charges. The agency emphasized that her case demonstrates the ability of domestic and international law enforcement to track, locate, and apprehend individuals who are attempting to evade justice by crossing borders. While authorities have not disclosed the investigative methods used to locate her, they describe the operation as part of a sustained effort to ensure that the United States does not become a safe haven for members of violent transnational gangs. For the communities in Northern Virginia, the arrest brought a measure of reassurance, knowing that a person wanted for serious crimes abroad was no longer living among them. Number 5. Martin Neftali Aguilar-Rivera. Martin Neftali didn't look like a typical criminal leader, but prosecutors said he was one of the most dangerous people operating in Columbus, Ohio, during MS-13's violent rise in the Midwest. To the untrained eye, Aguilar-Rivera blended in, no flashy presence, no dramatic profile, but behind closed doors, he was issuing commands that led to brutal executions and territorial dominance. From 2015 to 2017, Aguilar-Rivera ran the Columbus branch of MS-13, one of the most feared gangs in the world. According to court documents and reports by the Columbus Dispatch and AP News, he didn't carry out the killings himself. He didn't have to. His leadership role gave him power, and that power was used to silence enemies, punish disloyalty, and expand control through fear. The 5 killings connected to him weren't random acts. They were carried out as part of gang strategy, targeting those seen as threats, rivals, or weak links. One victim was shot in front of his home. Another was found in a wooded area, stabbed and left to rot. All 5 shared something in common. They had crossed MS-13. Authorities were slow to connect the dots. Murders seemed isolated at first, but as more information surfaced, a pattern emerged. Surveillance footage, burner phone data, and gang informants painted a picture of coordinated violence. Aguilar-Rivera was at the center of it. He wasn't just approving hits, he was managing operations like a war room commander. The RICO case built against him was massive. Hundreds of pages of transcripts, hours of wiretaps, and detailed accounts from cooperating witnesses were compiled. In 2019, he was arrested and charged with RICO conspiracy and murder in aid of racketeering. The indictment detailed a chilling level of control. Aguilar-Rivera allegedly gave orders through intermediaries, used coded language, and demanded results without leaving fingerprints. During trial, prosecutors brought in gang experts who explained MS-13's structure and brutal tactics. Jurors saw crime scene photos, heard recordings of conversations discussing targets, and read texts that mapped out hit lists. The defense attempted to distance him from the acts, but it was clear he wasn't just part of the gang, he was running the show. Aguilar-Rivera was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The judge called him a persistent threat to public safety. He was removed from Ohio and sent to a federal high-security prison where he will spend the rest of his life. The case brought national attention to MS-13's expansion beyond coastal cities. Number 6. Leniz Escobar. It began with a social media post and ended in a park at night. The name tied it all together. La Diablita, the Little Devil. That was Leniz Escobar, a young woman who led a violent trap that shattered lives and left Long Island in shock. Escobar was part of one of MS-13's Long Island cliques, a group that operated in plain sight, yet used fear to hide in the open. She wasn't a foot soldier. She was someone who could persuade, who could lure. According to federal investigators, she did just that. On April 11, 2017, 4 young men, Miguel Lopez, Justin Livicura, Jefferson Villalobos, and Jose Tigre, were brought to a wooded park in Central Islip under false pretenses. A simple hangout invitation turned into a deadly ambush. Escobar and a co-conspirator, Kaylee Gomez, had shown MS-13 members photos of the victims flashing gang-related signs. Even though they weren't affiliated, the gang felt offended. That moment of perceived disrespect was all it took. Escobar drove the victims to the park and quietly alerted the waiting gang members by text. Once the victims arrived, the ambush began. The men were surrounded, attacked with machetes, knives, wooden clubs, and even an axe. One victim escaped, but the other 4 were killed, their bodies left in the woods. A gruesome echo of calculated violence. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York led the case alongside the FBI's Long Island Gang Task Force. Their investigation uncovered a detailed plan orchestrated by Escobar, luring the victims, coordinating the ambush, and even disposing of evidence afterward. One witness testified that she smiled while the victims were being attacked, the worst of brutality mixed with chilling detachment. In 2022, Escobar was convicted on multiple charges, including murder in aid of racketeering and racketeering conspiracy. Her sentencing came in October 2024, 50 years in federal prison. The judge called her role key, saying that without her orchestration, the massacre would not have happened. During sentencing, Escobar expressed remorse. She spoke of regret, saying, "Every breath reminds me that they are not here." But the families of the victims weren't moved. In court, they demanded the harshest consequences for the pain that was inflicted. Her case remains a reminder of how dangerous a single person can be when trusted to lead, and how quickly that trust can be twisted into violence. Number 7. Venus Romero Iraheta. On a cold February night in 2017, a group of teenagers led a 15-year-old girl down wooded trail in Springfield, Virginia. Streetlights stopped at the road's edge, and beyond that, only the crunch of leaves underfoot broke the silence. In the middle of that darkness was Venus Romero Iraheta, just 17 years old, but already carrying the authority of someone feared in the gang world. What happened next would stun even seasoned investigators. Venus's story begins far from that night. She had immigrated from El Salvador to the United States as a child, growing up in Northern Virginia, a region that law enforcement says became a hub for certain MS-13 cliques. By her mid-teens, she was already associated with the gang, earning a reputation for being quick-tempered, fiercely loyal to her friends, and unafraid of confrontation. But prosecutors later said her loyalty turned lethal when she became convinced that the victim, a girl named Damaris, had played a role in the killing of her boyfriend months earlier. The crime unfolded over hours. Investigators later pieced together a chilling timeline from phone records, witness accounts, and surveillance footage. Damaris was lured to a park late at night under the pretense of meeting friends. Instead, she found herself surrounded by multiple people, including Venus. The group walked her deep into a wooded area. There, police say, Venus confronted her, demanding answers, accusing her of betrayal. When the conversation turned heated, the confrontation escalated into violence. The following morning, hikers discovered Damaris's body along a creek bed. Detectives initially had few leads, but the investigation moved quickly once they began tracing social media connections and analyzing cell phone data. Several individuals were taken into custody, and among them was Venus. She was charged as an adult, a decision prosecutors said reflected both the severity of the crime and her active role in a violent gang network. In court, prosecutors painted Venus as a calculated participant who acted out of revenge. They introduced evidence of her communications before and after the incident, arguing she had been the one to personally attack Damaris. The defense countered that Venus was a troubled teenager caught up in a dangerous crowd, acting impulsively under emotional strain. In 2018, Venus Romero Iraheta pleaded guilty to charges of first-degree killing and gang participation. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after serving a significant portion of her time. Today, she is held in a Virginia State Correctional Facility, far removed from the suburban streets where her life once revolved around high school hallways and gang allegiances. The case sent shockwaves through Fairfax County, sparking renewed debates about how to address gang recruitment among teenagers and the role social media plays in fueling violent disputes. Number 8. Lidia DelCarmen-Rodriguez. It began on a quiet spring evening in central Islip, New York. The sun had just dipped behind the houses, leaving the streets bathed in a dim orange glow. A group of young people gathered near a wooded path, laughing and speaking in Spanish slang that outsiders wouldn't understand. Among them was 21-year-old Lidia DelCarmen-Rodriguez, a figure known within certain circles for her connections to the MS-13 clique operating in the area. Before the night was over, police say, she would be part of a coordinated attack that left a teenager dead and an entire community shaken. Lidia's path into gang life mirrored that of many others in Suffolk County's MS-13 presence. Prosecutors later described Lidia as an active associate, someone trusted enough to take part in violent operations, but not flashy enough to draw attention. In April 2019, tensions between rival groups in the area were high. According to court records, a teenage boy, just 16 years old, had been targeted by MS-13 members after a dispute that started online and spilled into the streets. That night, Lidia and several others lured him to a local park under the pretense of hanging out. Once he arrived, the group led him down a narrow path lined with trees. There, prosecutors say, the plan shifted from casual conversation to a deadly ambush. The attack was brutal in its precision. Witnesses later testified that Lidia's role was not passive. She was part of the group that surrounded the victim, cutting off any chance of escape. Within minutes, the teenager was left lifeless. It didn't take long for police to focus on Lidia and her associates. Suffolk County law enforcement, working alongside federal agents, tapped into a web of phone data, social media messages, and eyewitness accounts. Within weeks, multiple suspects were arrested. Lidia was charged with second-degree killing and gang conspiracy. Her name added to a growing list of defendants linked to MS-13 violence on Long Island. In court, the prosecution emphasized the calculated nature of the crime, the luring, the coordinated roles, and the gang's motive to intimidate. In 2021, she was convicted and sentenced to decades in prison, ensuring she would spend most of her adult life behind bars. Number 9. Vanesa Alvarado. Vanesa's story began years earlier, when she immigrated from Central America to the United States. Like many who arrived without strong community ties, she found herself navigating an environment where gang influence was present and persistent. By her late teens, law enforcement identified her as an active MS-13 associate in the Maryland suburbs, working alongside male and female members in the clique's local operations. She was known as someone who could earn trust, both from gang insiders and from people who had no idea who she really was. The victim, 18-year-old Christian Villagran Morales, had been living in the area for less than a year. Prosecutors later said he became the target of an internal MS-13 order, accused of disrespecting the gang and violating its code. In early June 2016, members began setting a trap. Witness testimony and phone records showed that Vanesa played a key role in luring him to Malcolm King Park. Christian arrived at the park expecting to meet someone he trusted. Instead, several gang members, including Vanesa, were waiting. They walked him deep into a wooded area, away from the sounds of the playground and the street. There, according to prosecutors, the confrontation turned fatal. Christian was attacked, and within minutes, he was gone. His body was discovered later, hidden in the brush. The investigation moved quickly. Montgomery County Police, with assistance from federal gang units, pieced together surveillance footage, text messages, and forensic evidence linking Vanesa and others to the scene. When officers arrested her, they also uncovered evidence suggesting she had direct knowledge of the gang's plans in the days leading up to the killing. In 2018, Vanesa was convicted of first-degree killing and conspiracy, receiving 40 years in prison. The case drew attention across Maryland, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because of Vanesa's role as a young woman in a gang so often associated with male violence. Number 10. Karla Jackelin Morales. It began with a promise of friendship, the kind of invitation that seems harmless. In July of 2018, 24-year-old Jose Alfonso Villanueva thought he was going to celebrate his birthday. Instead, he was walking into a trap. The person who said it was someone he trusted, a young woman named Karla Jackelin Morales, only 20 years old at the time. Morales told Villanueva that they would meet in a quiet field in Spring, Texas, and smoke together. What he didn't know was that 5 MS-13 members were waiting in the shadows, armed with machetes and a gun. The gang believed Villanueva had disrespected them during a rap battle, and in their world, even small insults could turn deadly. Morales' role was simple, but devastating. Bring Villanueva to the field and walk him into an ambush. When Villanueva arrived, he was immediately surrounded. The gang members attacked with machetes, striking at him again and again. In the chaos, Villanueva tried to run for his life, but one of the men pulled out a firearm and shot him. His body was left in the field, hidden from view. It would take nearly a week before investigators discovered what had happened. Police quickly linked the killing to MS-13, and before long, Karla Jackelin Morales' name surfaced as a key player in the setup. The legal process against Morales was complicated. She was arrested and faced federal charges for her role in the murder. Prosecutors argued that without her, the gang would never have been able to lure Villanueva into such a vulnerable situation. Her cooperation with the attackers made her just as responsible as those who carried out the killing itself. As her trial approached, Morales decided not to take her chances in front of a jury. She accepted a plea deal, admitting her part in the deadly ambush. In exchange, she avoided a life sentence, but was still ordered to serve 30 years in prison. After completing her sentence, she will likely face deportation to El Salvador. Jose Alfonso Villanueva was only 24, with his future ahead of him, and his murder was another reminder of how MS-13 uses manipulation and fear to maintain control. Morales wasn't the one swinging the machete or pulling the trigger, but her betrayal was the key that unlocked the crime. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you've stayed with me all the way through, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and which story stood out to you the most. Thanks for tuning in, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.